I suppose that ultimately context is everything. We hear this story today about fear and disbelief and uncertainty in the shadow of our context. We hear this story of peace and do not be afraid in a world that has seen 3 million people die of COVID. We hear these words in the shadow of another overnight shooting in a country that sees about one mass shooting just about every other day. We hear these words, peace be with you and fear not, when that other reality makes us nervous to know that we can't really go to the grocery store to mail a package or to send our kids to school or come to worship. And from the shooting last night in Kenosha, we can't even go to a bar to forget about it all and feel completely safe. And even here, in this place, surrounded by so much uncertainty, the uncertainty of an interim, not having a settled pastor, the uncertainty of what this community will look like once COVID is finally over, if and when that reality ever happens, in the context of a budget deficit and a building that needs an enormous amount of repair. In some ways, the world and even our context here feels like perpetual Good Friday. There's death around us all the time, it seems like. And I think our natural response to this kind of ongoing crisis and trauma and uncertainty is to do exactly what the disciples did, and to just lock ourselves up somewhere safe. And sometimes that's literally what we do. We retreat to our homes and we lock ourselves in, or our gated communities, so we can keep track of who's coming in and out. Or sometimes it's not so literal. Sometimes it's the locking up that we do inside of ourselves, inside of our own hearts. We lock ourselves off from people who might need us. We lock ourselves off from people who are different than us because we're simply afraid of what reaching out and touching might actually feel like or ask of us. And yet we gather here week after week after week. Because somewhere, even though it feels like perpetual Good Friday out there, we are an Easter people. We believe in resurrection. We believe that life comes out of death. And it is that story of resurrection and new life that is the proof to us, at least the reminder to us, that even when we think the story is over, when we think that's all she wrote, when we think there's nothing else to do, when we think there's no hope, when we're not sure how to go forward, that God still has something to say to us. And so the invitation, I think, from our gospel story today is to ask ourselves, what is God trying to say to us then? And I think Jesus says very clearly, twice, he says, look. It's a simple thing, just look. Open your eyes and see. But here's the thing, this invitation to look from Jesus is actually more than it appears at first glance, excuse the pun. Because what Jesus is suggesting to the disciples is that the very fear that we hold, the uncertainty that we carry, makes it impossible for us to see. That we cannot begin to imagine something else than what we already know when we're locked in fear and uncertainty. We can only see what we've already always seen. We can only hear what we've already heard. And we can only begin to imagine that which we've already experienced. And that is a kind of death in itself. Today, the invitation, I think, or at least one of them, is for us to take a good look at what it is that we are really afraid of. What is it that we feel like we need to secure ourselves against? To look at what keeps us locked up and separated from each other, separated from God, and ultimately even separated from the very heart of who we are. Now, I think it's natural, right? When we're afraid, when we're uncertain, when we feel a lot of anxiety, the natural thing is to flee, to run away, to hide. And we get creative in that hiding. Sometimes it's literal. Again, we lock ourselves in our houses, in our neighborhoods, and we keep to ourselves and our families. But sometimes we lock ourselves away in our own convictions, our absolute need to be right, our absolute certainty that we know the answer to the question in front of us. And sometimes we lock ourselves away by withdrawing and waiting to see what happens. We sit on the sidelines as bystanders and watch the world, our community, church, and just see what's going to happen. And then we'll decide if we're going to move past our uncertainty and engage completely and fully. There's a story from Rachel Naomi Remen, a woman I love a lot, in her book, My Grandfather's Blessings. And I'd like to share it with you. She says, as a child, I was surrounded by my father's fear. And then many years ago, as I was trying to sort myself out from the ways I had lived and inhabit the way that I am, my companion in this process, a therapist, had given me the gift of an exquisite antique silver bracelet. And she had it engraved with the single word, clear. Now, she had known that a silver bracelet was something that I would take seriously, and for more than a year, I never took it off, Rachel says. A few months after she gave it to me, I asked her why she had it engraved with the word clear and not with my name. Look it up, the therapist said, but only in a very large dictionary. And so Rachel goes on, I looked it up in the Random House Dictionary of the English Language and found that it had more than 60 meanings, many of which have to do with freedom. Free from obstruction, free from guilt, free from blame, free from confusion, free from entanglement, free from limitation, free from suspicion, free from illusion, free from doubt and uncertainty, free from ambiguity, and so on. And of course, its ultimate meaning, which is able to serve perfectly in the passage of light. To be clear, able to serve perfectly in the passage of light. What Jesus offers us in this story is an invitation to freedom. An invitation to allow ourselves to trust in this God that we claim to believe in, and to trust in this God enough to move through our fear, to move past it, to get on with what needs to get on in spite of it, and to recognize that that's where the freedom is. And that in that freedom comes clarity. And in that clarity, we are able to be disciples. That light, right? The able to serve perfectly in the passage of light, able to serve perfectly in the passage of God into the world. That's it. It's not complicated. It's not easy, but it's not complicated. Our job is to get clear. To get clear that God is here. And that God is not done. And that God is not done talking to us. You know, there's a line from the first letter of John that says, "What we will be has yet to be revealed." Gosh, that's hopeful, isn't it? That we can't even begin to imagine what's coming. We can't even begin to imagine what God wants to do with us and with us. And all we have to do, we don't have to know how. We're not even supposed to know how. We just have to believe that that's true and get clear enough to let it move through us. Which means we have to let go of our fear. We have to let go enough to see it. We have to let go enough to accept the invitation. It's not complicated.